Welcome to Global India, a cultural fusion podcast. I am Dr. Aruna Moidu and co-host for today's episode with Dr. Lily Padman. Tell me what you eat and I'll tell you what you are. This piece of homespun wisdom comes to us from 1825, from the writings of Briand Savarin, a Frenchman, an attorney by profession but an epicure by choice. But are these words as relevant today? In a world of fancy diets and changing food fads, a frenetic lifestyle, and a departure from our culturally dictated eating habits, can they still be relevant? Certainly the explosion of diabetes, pre-diabetes, obesity, and other metabolic diseases seems to indicate so. How too can we explain that in India, where large parts of our population is malnourished, is home to 73 million diabetics? To answer these and other questions is our guest today, Dr. Manoshi Bhattacharya. Dr. Bhattacharya graduated from the Armed Forces Medical College and thereafter served in the Indian Navy. She is the author of the book No Food Off Limits, a handbook for use of clinicians for management of chronic illness like diabetes. She now practices medical nutrition therapy, and her advice is always prefaced with, to be conducted under the care of a physician. Thank you, Dr. Manoshi, for joining us today. I hope you can help us dispel some of the myths and fallacies around food and disease. First, though, could you explain to us about the evolution of the food habits in the Indian subcontinent? How did we evolve from the frugal diet of our ancestors to the prolific and frankly profligate dietary habits of the modern world?
Thank you, Dr. Moidu, for the introduction and this invitation to speak on this forum. As you rightly said, Paleolithic hunter-gatherers ate the same way all over the world. As pack hunters similar to wolves, they could manage a kill once or twice a month. That was when the clan feasted. The meat was shared by all. It was preceded by days of uncertainty, that is fasting or starving for a couple of days at a stretch, and a few days of meager vegetarian food that is extremely fibrous, roots, shoots, and berries. We know this is true as the same practice was converted into the dietary law of Manu, which Indians followed well into the 1800s. Eat a meager vegetarian meal once a day on most days, no snacking in between meals, fast for 46 hours twice or thrice a month, feast once or twice a month, and then share the prasad, that is the flesh of sacrificed animals, alcohol, and sugary confections. These three foods could not be eaten otherwise. Much as the horror this generates, the lesson was, the human body needs very little food. Do not become a burden on the plant or the animal kingdoms. Keto diet and OMAD. These were Manusmriti's one meal a day concept, but Manusmriti gives a fraction of the food eaten by the modern followers of the keto diet. Intermittent fasting. Nice play of words. Indians, until 200 years ago, fasted 23 hours a day every day and maintained at least one or two 46-hour-long fasts in a month. We had old-fashioned names for this. Upvas or Vrat, words that even we look down upon as retrogressive. Feasting. This word has not made its way into the modern dietary jargon of the West, which is still in the process of reinventing the wheel. But with good blood parameters and controlled eating, Indians celebrated without guilt once or twice a month in the manner of our Paleolithic ancestors. But the greatest change that deprived India of good health came during the 200 years of British Raj, which led to 200 years of artificial famine. Food security was lost. People began to eat whenever and whatever little they could lay their hands on. Eating 3 times a day or more became the norm. The food proportions changed and the memories were lost. All free lands, forests, rivers and seas were seized, and the forest people and tribals practically evicted. Hunting, fishing, collecting firewood and edible forest produce were banned. People were made to work in the British sense, to earn their food, and salaries were paid in grain. Every other food and necessity of life attracted large taxes, far, far larger than those imposed on Englishmen living in Great Britain. As a result, grain dominated the diet of British India and sadly continues to do so even now. I have well-to-do patients who plead, दिन में एक पराठा या थोड़ा सा चावल खाने दीजिए please. Despite all the food available now, they cannot give up the practice of the famine years.
Thank you for that fascinating overview. Can you explain now how food is broken down in the human body? How does it turn into blood sugar? And how does this cause obesity and diabetes?
What do we eat? Plants and animals. Plants are made up of largely carbohydrates and small bits of proteins and fats. Animal bodies like our own are made up of protein and fat only. The point to be understood here is that carbohydrates come exclusively from plants. Even the holiest of holies, that is kale, is primarily a carbohydrate. When we eat and digest, it is this carbohydrate from plants that turns into blood sugar. High levels of sugar in the blood is toxic to the brain, and the body drops every other job to simply move the sugar out of the blood. The brain tells the pancreas to immediately release insulin. The hormone's job is to push the sugar into the cells that will be able to burn it for energy. But once the cells are chock-a-block with sugar, insulin will convert the sugar, still sitting in the blood, into fat, which is worn like a garment or stuffed into body cavities like the abdomen. Excessive plant eating leads to diabetes, obesity, heart disease, Alzheimer's, which are all a part of the same disease process. What Sushruta said in the 6th century BCE, the American Diabetes Association repeated in 2010. It is not the type of carbohydrate eaten, but the total quantity that has a greater impact on the body. Protein and fat, the two other macronutrients, do not break down into sugar. They do not raise blood sugar, and nor do they convert into fat that weighs us down.
Are you saying my healthy, balanced ghar ka khana is the one that's making me sick? Is the desi diet completely wrong? And what is wrong with dal? And no desserts at all, ever?
Whenever someone asks this, I tell them my favourite story of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. The Honourable William Osborne, then Military Secretary to Lord Auckland, rode out with the Lion of Punjab at dawn. The day was 4th June 1838. They stopped for breakfast at noon. Please note that breakfast, or the breaking of the night-long fast, is taking place at midday. Let us look at this exciting meal. 2 trays were brought in. There were 6 sal leaf donas on each. 1 had rice, 2 had curry, the 4th had curds, the 5th deboned quail, the 6th had sweets. There was a choice of iced sharbat or milk. There were no second helpings, no chai and no paratha. The rice was just 1/6 of the meal, but there was also a place for a sweet. This was the only meal they had that day. There were drinks and quail tikkers later in the evening, permitted by Sushruta for kings alone, and that was that. This is 1838, and we are talking of one of the wealthiest men in India, who exercised really hard, and this was his daily routine. No different from what was being followed 4,500 years ago. Think of our modern schedules. An amla or soaked almonds on waking, bed tea and biscuits, breakfast with a dosa or chila or bread, milk or fruit, mandir ka prasad, tea break at 11 a.m., lunch with dal, chawal, rotis, dahi, 2 sabzis, a small serving of a non-vegetarian dish or paneer, and an occasional meetha. A 4 p.m. coffee and cookie, evening snacks and drinks, dinner which is more or less a repeat of lunch, a glass of milk before sleep. And we feel virtuous if we didn't open that second packet of namkeen or turned down the murukku that was offered by a colleague. From OMAD, we have moved to eating 10 meals a day as a part of the Desi diet. The fact is, we are eating too much of food, and it is our plant intake that has gone through the roof. Yes, you will say, but these plants are unrefined and home-cooked. But all said and done, we have to count our carbohydrate intake regardless of the source. The culprits in the Desi diet are dal, chawal, roti, sabzi and fruits. Fruits? The apple a day wala apple? Yes, it has the same fructose that is present in the high fructose corn syrup. The same is true of honey. Too much of these foods, and you might as well have some high fructose corn syrup. Dal, the protein food of India? Well, 100 grams of raw dal has 20 grams of protein, the same as 100 grams of raw meat. Great! But the 100 grams of raw dal also has 46 grams of carbohydrates, where meat has none. Dal is a plant, remember? As you increase your intake of dal to increase your protein intake, you double the carbohydrate intake. Dals, rajma, chole, lobia, besan, they all cause blood sugars to soar when eaten in the usual serving size. Sweets? Yes, of course you can fit them in. After all, did ADA not say keep the total carbs of the day low without worrying about the type? The treat foods, sweets or dals or fruits, can be paired with a zero-carb main course. Think kebabs and a small helping of jalebi. Think a large bowl of sarson ka saag and half a makki roti, or a small appam and a large helping of chicken stew. Team them with a green salad and skip the other high-carb foods on that day. For the lovers of beans, chili con carne is great. Pick up less of the beans.
For such an exhaustive effort, what was your motivation? What nutritional databases do you use? And how do you put together traditional Indian meals from different regions?
One needs a personal crisis for any kind of intense motivation. In my case, it was my mother, who was already suffering and didn't need yet another cross to bear. More drugs and prescribed diets were making no difference. She complained about the boring food, and I wondered what was so wrong with the Bengali and continental food we ate. I had the Food Central database set up by USDA, but now came the tricky part. How many grams of raw rice, wheat, potato, zira, haldi, fish, etc. did she consume in a day? It meant I had to learn to cook the exact amounts she ate. And I did it. It took several months of learning to cook with her. Then an Excel sheet put it all together, and I could see why her carb intake was high. I hoped to give her just the amount of carbohydrate that her body could handle, without leaving her hungry. The correction helped her. I then used the same process, cooking with homemakers from different states, and worked out what they ate and where a correction would set things right. The best menu appears to come from Kashmir. It meets all the USDA targets.
How do your methods compare with other popular nutritional diet plans?
I take on a very small number of patients every month as they need intensive monitoring. This system eventually has better compliance as I customize the patient's home food. They eat more or less what they have always been used to. The appetite reduction program and education are the mainstay of the system. Patients are encouraged to go to sleep and rise with the sun, and of course, there is no snacking between meals. These reset the body clock and the hormones and are in complete accordance with the dietary law of Manu.
Lastly, how do you convince young people to cook in today's world?
This is the easiest answer. Sheer desperation, followed by a quick reward, needs no further convincing. Initially, I helped the youngsters choose foods at restaurants and at tandoori takeaways. The cost factor and the ease of reproducing the food they enjoy soon begins to appeal to them. Youngsters who couldn't be dragged into their kitchens by their mums have begun cooking with me.
Thank you, Dr. Manoshi, for a most informative talk. I could not conclude without mentioning you have written several other books as well, some of them historical and the others non-fiction. But this talk has been an inspiring one. Management of diabetes is very possible. As Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Moidu and Dr. Bhattacharya, for an enlightening session filled with medical facts which will definitely benefit our listeners. A big thank you to our listeners as well. We conclude this episode with a medical joke and a humorous medical song. As we all know, laughter is the best medicine, and here is a small dose to perk you up. Bob said to Joe, "So, how are you? And what did the doctor say?" Joe replied, "I'm still not okay. The doctor said he would have me on my feet in 2 weeks. And he was right. I was forced to sell my car to pay the bill."
A doctor, here's a few things you need to know if you wanna be my doctor and keep me alive. Check my pulse and brain, percussive auscultate, and don't forget to check my pupils, moles, and new. Make sure you treat me right, cause if you don't, I might sue you till you bleed. Liability.
You'll have that 5 to 9 and maybe overtime. So don't get used to sleep or ever coming home at night. You won't have time for scrubs, cause you'll be in your scrubs.
What's wrong with me?
No time to pee.
You gotta know how to treat my lacerations, my broken bones and palpitations. Make sure everything's alright. Dear future doctor, here's a few things you need to know if you wanna be my doctor and keep me alive. Dear future doctor, if you wanna get that special rating, please check my whole body, answer my questions all in 15 minutes each and every time.
Ask to hold their hand and order every scan, and then tell them they're fine and bill them for $100 grand. And even if you're wrong, pretend you're never wrong. Pay for your degree, pay for that degree. You gotta know how to treat the green secretions, their gene repeats and gene deletions. Make sure everything's alright.
Dear future doctor, here's a few things you need to know if you wanna be my doctor and keep me alive. Dear future doctor, make time for me, don't keep me waiting.
I have the flu.
No poo.
Super glue.
I'll be saving lives on one side of the bed. Hey, you'll prescribe some drug you read about in PubMed. You think you're really smart? Just come and sign the chart. Med school degree. What? Google's free. I got to know how to treat the bites and masses, the smelling blood out of their lashes, cause you won't do a damn thing right.
Dear future doctor, here's a few things you need to know if you wanna be my doctor and keep me alive. Dear future doctor, if you wanna still become a doctor, you are a masochist, but yeah, come on and join the line. Whoa, future doctor, better treat me right.